Okay, hi everybody. It's Dan Cerrucci. We are live, just as promised. In fact, we're a couple of minutes early. I'm here with Joe Labarbera, and Joe and I have chatted before. But Joe, before we do anything, I'm going to go onto Facebook and make sure that we are on Facebook. Um, that we're on Facebook Live, and that I want to put it on um, public and make it shareable. Um, I'm looking for Facebook here. Wait a minute. Here we go.
No worries. I was going through the same thing a little while ago. I'm doing this in the basement because the kids are upstairs watching TV. Wife's working on her MBA online. So
Oh
as a result, I got to be downstairs here in the basement where my technology's bad. So I'm going to the phone because it's too slow on the computer.
well, it almost looks like a studio, Joe. It looks great. It
Oh
looks
yeah, yeah.
fantastic.
It's just my downstairs basement where I got all my stuff.
We are live on Facebook, and I'm going to set it up so that it's public, and that means that you can go there and share it as well, and make sure that you're sharing it. And
Mhm.
then I want to just check LinkedIn to make sure. I always like to double check before we begin our discussion, just to make sure
Yeah.
we're supposed to be, because you never can be sure with these kinds of things.
Nope. Very prudent.
And there we are. We are on LinkedIn as well. Okay. So, Joe, like I said, let me, by way of introduction to everybody, um, Joe is I think he's a fascinating character, person. First of all, he's done remarkable service to our country in the military, spending, what was it, 54 months, I think you said, Joe, in Afghanistan.
A total of my total combined deployment time was 54 months. I did 2 tours in Iraq and 3 in Afghanistan.
Okay, so you were involved, as he said, in America's longest war.
Yeah.
And he's now a dean at Warren County Community College here in New Jersey, and he is the Republican county chair of Sussex County, and he's what you might call a gentleman farmer. Although the last time, Joe, that you and I talked, you got on late because you were having some problems at your farm.
Yeah.
You had just come off the farm, and he's doing sustainable farming.
Hmm.
That's like another a whole nother story, which someday maybe we'll get into. Um, would you call yourself a back to nature person, Joe, or is that a little bit too?
I don't know. I really love nature. I like being in the woods. I love animals. I love the cycle of nature, and I love being part of it. So I'm definitely a man of the land, and I do love nature. Yeah.
Although you were born and raised in a city,
Yep. Staten Island.
Staten Island, which, I mean, I can't, now New Yorkers may not count it as a city; they may count it as the suburbs. But
Yeah.
I I've been to Staten Island. In fact, my uncle, by marriage, lived there.
Hmm.
A dear aunt and uncle of ours is since deceased. But I've been there, and it's very cityfied.
Yeah.
Although at one time it was quite, countrified in its
When
own
my
way.
father went to Staten Island in 1960, they had a game warden, and it was farmland.
Okay, there you are. You
Hmm.
see. So, Joe, we want to move along here because, folks, we want to begin with plenty of time for everyone to see President Trump's address to a joint session of Congress tonight. When President Trump makes one of these addresses, we never know what he's going to say. It's always fascinating, always
Hmm.
entertaining. And tonight we've got, the loony Democrats virtually tearing their hair out.
I know it's awesome.
And there's no We have no idea what they're going to do or how they're going to act, Joe. They may turn their back on him. A lot of them may not show up. They may be wearing buttons. They may all be dressed in a certain color. There's all kind of. It's just, folks, they're losing their minds.
No.
I have a niece who would use a more a cruder word. She's a very successful athlete, and she would use a little bit cruder term and say they're losing their.
It's all right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I got you.
All right. So, so Joe, you have some very specific views about Ukraine. It's a little bit less than a week ago that we had this fracas in the Oval Office with Zelensky.
Mm-hmm.
What was that all about, Joe? I mean, what happened there?
In that particular moment, this is basically what we call in the military a break in contact. It looks like our POTUS 47, President Trump, has made the decision to pivot from the current obligations that we have and the commitments that we have to something that I believe is going to be a strategic disaster long term. I think this is about cutting our losses now. The paradigms that we went into this with were completely errant. The idea, and so we'll back up a little bit. In 2014, 2015, I was the Orders and Plans Chief for First Corps in Fort Lewis, Washington. And I was involved and read on to the initial fighting that was happening in the Donbass between the Russian separatists, which were backed by the Russian army, and the Ukrainian army, and the fighting that was going on there. And it was a fighting largely of paramilitaries, private military groups, oligarchs. It was largely a personal power struggle between warring factions that really answered to no government. Putin is in a strategic dilemma with Ukraine. Now, Putin, I believe, is being looked at very wrongly. Now, not to say he's a good man, he's not. Putin is a dictator. He is a nihilist. He's Machiavellian. And Putin is somebody who has no qualms about hurting anybody if it helps the cause of Russia. That being said, he's largely incompatible with the values of Western civilization.
However, it helps what he perceives as the cause of Russia.
Yes, well, he's
okay. All right.
Well, Vladimir Putin sees Russia in the same historical context that Russia's been in for centuries. Putin sees Russia as a Eurasian powerhouse. There's a great book to read about this. It's called Recasting the Red Star. So you don't need to have been read on or in a skiff or reading bios about Putin. You don't need any of that. You can read the book Recasting the Red Star, which was written by very informed people, by an informed author, and you can understand how Vladimir Putin views the world and how he handles the world is unique to his role as a tier 1 level operator in the KGB. Vladimir Putin was one of the world's best spies. And the KGB did run rings around us in terms of human intelligence, not technical intel. We've always led in tech. But in the 80s and in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the Russians effectively ran rings around us. And I wasn't there, but that's what I was trained and taught and learned from a lot of competent professionals, that their human intelligence was far superior to ours. Their ability to recruit spies and infiltrate our organizations was always better. Okay. So Vladimir Putin has a very mature understanding of America, our government, our military, and our character. He has a very mature and intimate understanding of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get back to this, what you were saying about the war and what happened with Ukraine and Zelensky and what's going on here.
Mm-hmm. Zelensky has inherited he's inherited a very big mess. And I see Zelensky, and I suggest that we start looking at him not as a great hero, not as a malignant con artist, but as a fool who is out of his depth and has been misguided and is between a lot of different dilemmas in terms of the power structures within the Ukraine. Within Ukraine, you have very powerful oligarchs. You have military generals who are like warlords. And then you have a constituency which is divided into many factions. So one has to ask, before we started investing hundreds of billions of dollars through Zelensky into Ukraine, Does Zelensky have the ability that does he even have the power and ability to wage a war against Russia?
Mhm.
He's not the man for the job. He has no idea of military background. He's just not mature enough. He's not experienced enough. I would say the only positive is that he has stayed and fought and hasn't just picked up and ran like these ridiculous cowards that we backed in Afghanistan.
Mhm.
So looking at it that way, that's the first dilemma: is why would we make such a mistake? After we should have learned from Ghani and Karzai that when you throw billions and billions of dollars on a foreign leader who is
Mhm.
not really in charge and not
Mhm.
really suitable for the job, where's those billions going to go? So we're making the same stupid mistake we made back in Vietnam, where we back a
Yeah.
corrupt South Vietnamese leader. We did the same stupid mistake we do all over the world, where we try to sponsor leaders, then they screw up, then we got to overthrow them. We
Yeah.
create nothing but you know
In Vietnam, what was it? The DM regime?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
lived through Vietnam.
I know you
Lived
did.
through it.
I know.
Okay. I was well lived from day to day, wondering if I would be drafted.
Mhm.
Okay. And then they put in the lottery and this and that and the other, but the DM regime, I remember that distinctly. It was
Yeah,
the same
yeah.
scenario. We
Mhm.
poured billions of dollars into something that was propped up.
Mhm.
It was basically a facade.
And that government
Money
had
in
no
the government
intention
was a
of defeating the
facade.
Viet Cong or the NVA. There was never any. Same with Karzai. Same with Ghani. In Afghanistan, these leaders they had never had any intention of accomplishing any objectives that they were saying they were going to do or what the United States was going to do. So we
So
basically got fleeced.
one of the big mistakes, Joe,
Hmm.
it's just amazing how we allow this to happen, is
Mm.
getting into these conflicts without a clear end game in mind. What is the end game?
I know. So
How could
mhm.
such a so-called sophisticated military and arguably the most powerful in the world allow this to happen, Joe?
I can try to answer that.
Please.
All right. In the 1960s, we saw a massive shift in the Department of Defense, a shift that leaned towards a career ladder in the military that rewarded compliance instead of commitment. So progression was your ability to serve the institution and not the profession and not the nation. So your report card to become a general or an admiral was based on how well you served other generals or admirals. So they created all these little political courts that went down the line. And it got to the point that by 2012, at the Command and Staff College, before we graduated, our human resources leadership told me and my fellow infantry officers that unless you've been a general's aide, you would not get higher levels of command. 97% of all those selected for a battalion or brigade command were general's aides. So the military, you would never have had a military like that in World War II or World War One. You would have had that. So your career progression in the military became utterly sycophantic and nepotistic. As a result, you don't have general officers anymore who are leaders. To be a general officer, you have to almost reverse all the leadership that you've had and you perform, and then you have to become almost a sycophant. You have to become someone who parrots and perfects the model that the government gives you. There's no longer a General MacArthur, a General Patton, a General Eisenhower, a General Marshall, who can go to the Congress and go to the president and say, this is what we should do. We think this is wrong. You give me the order, sir, I'll salute and march out, but here's my honest feedback. That's gone out the window.
Basically, you have to become a suck up.
Oh, 100%. I mean, if you think about what it is to be an aide to a general, you're his manservant. Your job is to take care of his uniform, schedule his appointments. I mean, I can tell you some horror stories I've heard about what an aide has to do to make sure a general is okay. I mean, the aide is like the personal servant to a general officer. So once you are a general's aide, you can name your job and you can name your promotion. And then when you're in a unit, senior officers will be hesitant to grade you harshly if you've been an aide to a general because they don't want to piss off that general because that general is deciding their future. So, as I can repeat an anecdotal story I know about where a particular guy who'd been on the staff of a general, not even an aide. He'd been a captain on the staff of a general, was doing horrible in company command. And the battalion and the brigade commander wanted to end his career. They wanted to say, this guy is not capable. This guy's a real screw up. I was witnessing it and I believed it as well. The question posed was, are you willing to tell General so-and-so that the officer he had that he said was great is no longer great? So you're telling that general that he's wrong about this officer. And as a result, they kept him in command. They gave him a great evaluation, gave him a medal, and sent him on his way.
Because nobody was willing to tell the general the truth?
I was. They just wouldn't let me get in front of the general.
So, I mean, this must have been difficult for you as a smart, independent-minded person in the military. And did you, when you were in the military, did you already, I know you have a tremendous knowledge of military history and military terminology and all of that. Was that something that you gained while you were in the military, or was that something that you cultivated before you went into the military?
Both. Both. I am in love with and will always be in love with what I call the profession of arms, the warrior ethos. And it was refined. My love for military history and the profession was refined because the institutions and schools of the military are utterly phenomenal. I mean, you can't get a better military history course, in my view, than the Commandant's General Staff College. You can't get small unit tactics better than either between Quantico and what Fort Benning offer. So the military definitely fed my love for the profession, definitely. But the military sacrifices, the modern military, underneath the progression that's happened since the 60s and then really arced in the 90s under Clinton and then went nuts under Obama, that military placed the institution above the profession. So people served the institution, even if it ruined units, even if it ruined careers, even if it was stupid, even if it was wrong for the country. People supported it because you could not get on the other side of what they believed was good for the institution. So the bureaucracy trumped is basically what happened.
A lot of people said that when Robert McNamara served as Secretary of Defense, he came to the job as Secretary of Defense after running the Ford Motor Company. I believe it was Ford, one of the big three-car companies. At that time, there were big three in America. That he tried to run it like a corporation, and he turned it into like a corporation.
Yeah.
But okay, which had some good aspects and some bad aspects, but you're saying that today it isn't even that good. It isn't even as good as a well-run corporation.
Well, no. So a military organization cannot run like a business. A business has a profit; it has a bottom line, and the military and a business goes out of business when the profit is over.
Right.
A military organization has the power to take what it wants. So even if you're not getting resource from your nation, you have the power to take abroad what you need. I mean, the military is brute force throughout history. So you don't in the military you can't run like a corporation because you need very committed individuals. You're asking people to kill and die for their country. A corporation can't ask you to do that. You know, if your 401k is crap and your pay is bad, you leave the company. Well, in the military, you don't get a great pension, and your pay is always crap, and you still stay there and you're dedicated. It's a very different mentality to serve in the military than serve in a corporation, and I've done both, so I can speak from experience there.
So let's go back to Ukraine then. We established what has happened to the military, the modern military in America. What is the struggle that Trump is now facing as commander-in-chief? And do you think he's moving in the right direction?
Yes, but it's going to be ugly. So the struggle he's facing can be qualified as you are engaged in almost a death struggle in a war that has been lied about so much that you don't have the reality of what's going on. He's finally starting to get good intel, it looks like, or intel that isn't filtered through politics.
Hmm.
The intel that was going initially to Trump was dishonest. It was Trump started giving the Ukrainians Javelin missiles to stop tanks back when he was still president, and that was to aid their fighting in the Donbass. And the separatists, the Russian separatists in the Donbass, had an armor capability that was causing the Ukrainians some problems. So Trump was told that the Donbass region, which is the eastern Ukraine, was really part of Ukraine, and that Ukraine had a right to fight to take it back. And Trump supported them. The war escalated once Zelensky, who in my view is a very foolish man, started screaming he wanted to go into NATO. Now, here's what we have to understand. Imagine Mexico to the south of our border, simple geopolitics. Imagine the Russians putting a tank division in Mexico or two tank divisions in Mexico. I guarantee you the United States would have the 1st Cavalry Division out of Fort Hood, 1st Armored Division out of Fort Bliss, going over the Mexican border and invading Mexico that day. There's no way the United States would allow a foreign military to our southern border. No way. Now, Ukraine has a massive open, porous border. It's not like Europe. Europe has lots of little areas that the Russians can fight and defend against an invasion from, but not Ukraine. And in the Russia's history, most of their invasions that have been devastating have come from either the East or Ukraine, either by way of the Turks, by way of the Army Group South, the Southern Army Group of the Nazis. Russia's always had this threat coming from the South. Russia's strategic stability depends on having a secure border, a secure southern front. By saying Ukraine was going to go into NATO, I mean, imagine a U.S. Army Corps and a couple of NATO corps. A corps is, 3 or 4 divisions, about 60,000 troops, being able to just easily drive within several days and hit Moscow. So you're putting Putin in the horns of a dilemma. You're basically walking up to Putin and putting a gun to his head. Now, there's a big group out there. Putin's bad. Putin's bad. He's like Hitler. We can't appease him. We got to constantly pressure him. Okay, that's fine, but let's do it in a way that works. Let's do it in a way that's functional. Doing a half-assed sable rattle inspired Putin, who has proven if you threaten him, he will attack you if you're on his border. He's done it in Georgia. He's done it in Armenia. Putin, he's done it in Chechnya. So it was very predictable that he invaded Ukraine. And many of us knew that he was going to invade Ukraine back in 2014, 2015.
And so this provoked him.
100%. Russia was 100% provoked. That doesn't justify. Now, bear in mind, this doesn't justify his actions.
Right.
But Putin isn't a Western thinker. So who were the analysts? Who were the intelligence professionals who were giving the advice on this and allowing our State Department, allowing Biden, allowing the Europeans to constantly make this threat against Putin? Who were they? And this is part of the problem is, why are they so willing to drive us into a possible World War III with Russia? Russia has enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world. Even if only half. I had a Democrat tell me once, well, you know as well as I do, Joe, that, about 2/3 of Russian nuclear weapons may not work or get off the ground. Yeah, but 1/3 will, and that's about 1,000 nukes. Only 1,000. So it's only 1,000 nukes you got to worry about. So let's take the risk, right?
Very scary. So what about when Trump was saying in this blow up in the Oval Office with Zelensky, when Trump was saying, you want to keep the war going. You're not talking like you want to come to the table. You're talking about prolonging the war.
Yeah.
And you are playing with World War III. Was he right, or was Trump right?
Yeah, he was 100% right. I would caveat that my belief, looking at Zelensky, knowing his history, and knowing the dynamic he's in, I caveat that I don't think Zelensky can handle what's going on. I think he's in react mode, and I think he's wore out. I don't think he's fit for this position. So I don't think.
Why did he seem to be so stubborn, and why did he get into a shouting match with the president and vice president?
Because he's a spoiled brat. So this is a person who has been celebrated, serenaded, and showered with praise from the West. He's also been told by the Democrats who he's been flirting with that Trump is all these negative things. He's stupid, he's silly, he's crazy, all these things. Zelensky, in his ego, believes that Trump's not the real power. He believes that he can dictate terms to Trump. And he believes that the Democrats and the European powers can influence Trump.
Union,
yeah. But Zelensky, and this is why he's not fit for the position, the presidency is an extraordinarily powerful position in America. I mean, the presidency has enormous powers. It doesn't matter who the president is. The presidency is a very powerful, powerful position. It's designed to be the position of a war chief. So now Zelensky's not a war chief himself. He's not a great commander of military forces. I mean, Ukraine has done disastrously in this conflict. It's been a disaster, and I'd love to go into the tactics and operations piece, but Zelensky has. I honestly believe he just doesn't know what he's doing, and he's being led and influenced by a lot of people who are possibly using him for political talking points and to try to use Zelensky to embarrass Trump. I'm convinced that the Democrats probably told him to go here and talk tough to Trump and try to make him look bad so they could get their talking points, because that's how these Democrats think.
And then right after Zelensky ran to Europe to cuddle up to the Europeans so that they could act like they're going to save him, which
Yeah, and they're not. They're not. They're lying to him. They have no way to save him.
Don't have the ability or capacity to save him, do they?
No, the British Army is, I think, at 20,000 men. That's it. Between the Tories and the Labour Party, they've cut down the British Army to where it's basically the size of a division. The German army is unionized. I saw this up close and personal in Kunduz, Afghanistan. So if you don't like an order in the Union army, you can go to your union rep and file a grievance and stop the order from happening. I've actually witnessed that happen in Kunduz, Afghanistan, in 2010. Other than that, there really is no army in Europe. I mean, the Poles, the Hungarians not anti-Russian. The Poles are very concerned about Russia. So are the Finns, Estonians, and Latvians. But you're talking about a combined division plus that they can throw in. Russia has 4 corps. Russia's army is in terms of manpower, is far larger than ours. They have 40 combat brigades. Now, times that by 7, and that's the logistical tail, that's everything they have. But they have 40 fighting brigades that are at strength at any given time. Even with their massive casualties, they do replenish these brigades. And we've been told that they're losing all these men and their army's collapsing. Well, imagery is not lying, and imagery still shows all their army corps all in the same place, all fully manned in their assembly areas. So we've been lied to, clearly, about the composition, disposition, and strength of the Russian army. And then if this Russian army was due to collapse, as if we've been getting told now all these years, well, it doesn't look like it's collapsing at all.
And what about when Trump said to Zelensky, you're having to force people to be conscripted into the army, and you're having to pay people, and basically you're having to use soldiers of fortune to fight the war. What about that?
No, that's absolutely true. Look up the Ukraine Army Order of Battle. In the beginning of the war, we didn't know anything. It was very dark. We didn't have a good account of what was going on. But if you just Google the Ukrainian Army Order of Battle, you'll see that many of their formations are ad hoc. They're led and commanded by civilians who just transformed into majors, colonels, and generals overnight, and that they're on various payrolls by various oligarchs and aren't even resourced by the Ukrainian government. So yeah, and then in terms of conscription, the rank and file of the Ukrainian army has been disastrous, which is why so many of these ad hoc units sprung up. Because people who do go fight say, hey, I don't want to go fight in this conscript army. I'm going to go fight where the good guys are. So that's why they formed these ad hoc units. But their desertion rate has been utterly incredible. And the amount of soldiers that actually are in the fight are mostly foreigners and just honestly really, really good people. And I want to say, though, we got to be honest. The Ukrainians that are fighting a heroic battle. I mean, on their small unit level, you have you have companies, battalions that are fighting extremely admirably. But there's only so much you can do on a modern battlefield. And that's part of the deception. Part of the deception is we were fed all these little GoPro videos and drone footage of fire teams, squads, 4 guys, 9 guys, putting on heroic fights against the Russians. And we're presuming that this is going to win the war. And this is where I'm calling out my fellow professionals who are still in the army, who are in a position to advise. They know that these micro tactics can't win. They know that these micro tactics are not going to break the Russian defense. They're not going to be decisive at all. Yet they still allowed our government in America to believe that there was a fight that could be had based on the heroic actions of a few people. Modern warfare doesn't care what kind of hero you are. Modern warfare is about weapons, resources, firepower. I mean, there's a place for heroism to keep your unit alive and accomplish your objective, but that's not going to win the fight.
Do you think that um, Ukraine is going to have to accept, as part of a deal, if there is a deal, that Russia is going to have to keep a certain amount of territory that it's already claimed?
Yes, there's no reason for Putin to leave the Donbass or the Crimea, and he is not going to. I mean, the Russians. So you win wars. Wars are won by breaking the will of the enemy. You break the will of the enemy by synchronizing operations and strategy and your logistics to achieve the mark advantage over the enemy. You create such a problem for the enemy that the enemy loses their will to fight, and it's no longer in their interest to fight. The only thing Russia's losing in this war is blood, and they got plenty of it, and they don't care. Russians are not casualty adverse. Here's the difference, and this is why we're almost stupid. I hate to say it, but we're dumb here. In the U.S. Army, in Iraq and Afghanistan, in the U.S. Marine Corps, all our forces, if we lost one man, one guy got hit, an IED, sniper, guy firefight, the mission stopped, and we medevac the guy, and then we continued the mission. But we made sure we took care of our wounded man. We didn't leave people to die. That's the way we operate. The Russians don't care. If the Russians have a company or a battalion that's wiped out, they don't see it as a loss, but they never have. Why do we think that all of a sudden history is going to magically change? The
Mm.
Russians have shown they've been willing to lose tens of thousands of men, hundreds of thousands of men in every war they've ever been, and it means nothing. Why would they change now? Now, Russia can be beat. The Germans beat them in World War One. Japanese beat the crap out of them in several conflicts leading up to World War II. The Finns devastatingly destroyed them when they invaded Finland in the 30s. The Poles beat them in the 1920s. The Turks took a lot of. The Turks did a good job kicking their ass from time to time. Russia can be beat, but the cost of beating Russia is enormous, and
Mm.
especially when they're on the defensive, because that's one thing the Russian army is good at, is fighting on the defensive. They're horrible in the offensive, but they're very good in the defensive.
Mhm. Do you think that I don't know that I want to get into the whole question of whether or not Zelensky's going to survive, because I don't know how much we know about the internal politics, quote unquote, of Ukraine.
Yeah, they might just take him out himself. I mean, Ukraine's internal politics is dominated by oligarchs who are ruthless.
So that's who's really running the country.
100%. I mean, you don't have to be a genius to figure this out. Ukraine
And,
is
and,
run by very powerful oligarchs, and now they're double hatting as military leaders.
and so that's who Joe Biden and Hunter Biden were dealing with.
Yes. Yes.
They were making deals with the oligarchs.
Yeah.
Okay, so now um, Zelensky issued a statement today where he said he regrets what happened.
Of
I don't know
course.
that it was really an apology. Okay, I don't
Mhm.
think the word apology was ever really used. He regrets what happened, and he feels certain that he wants to make peace, and he feels certain that the United States and Ukraine will come to some kind of agreement and a deal will be finalized. First of all, do you think that we're going to be able to finalize the deal that he presumably came over here to do, which was the deal about the economic development and the rare earth minerals?
Well, we'll get the rare earth minerals. I mean, that's not a. I mean, it's just a matter of our will of going to get it and basically secure the mining operations to get it. But what is going to happen is, I mean, the Ukraine's going to lose this war. They're going to use this war. There's not enough on the ground to expel the Russians from the Donbass. The Ukraine does not have the mid-level and senior leadership that have the ability to do the combined arms operations necessary to breach the Russian defense, to take decisive terrain where they can have an advantage and force the Russian front to collapse. That doesn't exist. And there's numbers of reasons for that. The Russians have long-range precision fires, drones, airstrikes that can disrupt the lines of communication in assembly areas. Yet that's the challenge that the Ukraine middle leadership and senior leadership need to address, and they can't do it. So what you're going to see happening is it's going to end in the status quo. It's going to end in some kind of an armistice, and then we will see Putin taking over Ukraine probably in the future if it tickles his fancy. If it doesn't, he won't. But we're in this dilemma because of
Taking over the whole country?
it's possible. It's possible. It all depends on what kind of point he wants to make to the world. Now, you got to understand, after the Ukrainian army that's in the north right now, outside of Kursk, and in the east right now, guarding against the Donbass, there is nothing to stop the Russian army. The only thing that stopped the Russian army from taking Kiev is the incompetence of the Russian army. They couldn't do river crossings, and they kept it breaking down in their trucks. They go into leadership stagnation phases where nobody's giving any orders. It was very similar to their invasion of Chechnya, their attack on Grozny in 1992. The same thing happened. Massive offensive. They tripped over their own feet. It was like a big fat drunk in a bar going to fight and he falls on his own feet. That's a Russian offensive. But if he falls on you, you got a problem because he's so big.
Well, okay, so Zelensky is saying, and we're going to bring this to a conclusion. I want to conclude it by 8:45 because I want to give people time to get ready to see the president and so forth. But this is absolutely fascinating. Like I say, it's on my YouTube channel. We're live on Facebook. We are live on LinkedIn, and I'm going to have it up at dancerucci.com. And I'm also going to put this at the top of my Facebook page so it remains there, everybody, so that people can see it, as much as they want after tonight. But Zelensky is saying, I want a security guarantee. I want a security guarantee. And right here, Joe is shaking his head no. And Trump is saying, we will invest heavily in your country. We will make an economic investment in your country. We will be there on the ground, working and building your country. Our companies will be there. That's your security guarantee. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's foolish to give Ukraine a security guarantee because no one wants to have a nuclear war, the destruction of the planet over the Donbass region. And that's what we keep forgetting. The media and the globalists have pretended that Putin is this Hitler guy, and if we don't stop him here, he's going to overrun Europe and do all this stuff. We've seen that his formations can't even make it to Kiev, and that's even unopposed. There is, if anything, this war has made the Russian army better than anything else. This is how foolish this has been. But we are not going to risk, we thank God for Trump, we are not going to risk nuclear Armageddon just so the separatists in the Russian Donbass get kicked out of there. I mean, that's ultimately what this fight is about. It's about Putin wants to control the Donbass and the Crimea ports, and he wants access to the Black Sea, and he doesn't want Ukraine in NATO. So bringing Ukraine in NATO and kicking Putin out of there is going to likely cause a nuclear war. There'll be tactical nukes, then there'll be mid-range nukes, and then there'll be escalations. And it is absurd, just like we learned in World War I, where we end up getting into this death match for 4 years that just led to nothing but more war over Serbia. It's ridiculous that we wouldn't learn our lesson and that we would get into a death match over the Donbass. Because the myth of this Russian army that's going to invade and take over Europe, it's not there, and it doesn't exist right now at all.
And Joe, Europe is, this may seem highly simplistic, and this is from somebody who knows nothing about military history and military terminology, but Europe is like a collection of tribes that are constantly fighting one another.
Oh, it's been through history, and the only peace Europe's ever had is the peace we gave it. Our military umbrella brought more peace, a longer peace to Europe than it's ever had in its history. And we've funded them. I mean, we've covered their defense for God knows how long. They can have all this great socialism because they don't have to spend on a massive defense bill. And they've had now almost a century of peace and prosperity to grow and build their countries. Instead of gratitude, it's you owe us the United States, and then they attack us and they subvert our foreign policy around the world. They criticize us. I don't know what the interest is. The Soviet Union's
they
done.
Send their cars over here for sale, but we can't send our cars over there.
Oh, I know it's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous.
And that's just one product.
I know. The illusion, this notion that the United States has to protect Europe in order to have peace in the world. That is true if you have a Stalin. It's true if you have a Hitler. It's true if you have a Kaiser, Napoleon, even. We don't have that. And Putin has shown he's aggressive, but he's aggressive in limited wars, beating up his neighbors. Putin has not shown or as even has the capability to create any kind of large scale invasion of Europe. It just doesn't have it.
We're
So
told that Putin looks upon the mother Russia of old, and he wants to build a new Russian empire.
yes, yes, he absolutely does. But what was the Russian Empire? It was all those stands that were impoverished and economically backward. And it was all those countries in Asia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Chechnya, Tajikistan. It was all these countries where they looted resources and minerals and slave labor from. And that was the Russian Empire. That was the Russian Empire. The Russians started Kiev and Rus. It started as a Viking settlement on the Volga River that they did trade with the Byzantines. And it started where they had this big population of people who had nowhere to go. They were called the Slavs, and they used them for their labor sources. The Mongols conquered them. The boyars unite and trick the Mongols and overthrow them. And then they established their first leaders, and they established their first czars. The Romanovs take over in the 1600s. They peter out in the 1900s when they get overthrown by the Bolsheviks. The Soviet Union was just a replica of the old Tsarist Empire. They just came by a different name. Soviet Union's gone. Putin wants to see a Russia that is strong. Now, since this war has started, fact check me, Russia's GDP has gone up and Russian rubles have gone up in value. So our sanctions have not worked.
But we're told that Russia has tremendous inflation, that there's shortages, that people can't get the necessities of life, and so forth.
Go on YouTube. Go on YouTube and look at Russia and look at the way they're acting. Doesn't look like they're seeing mass poverty there. Go to YouTube and look at Moscow. Go to St. Petersburg. Go to Vladivostok. Go to any of these cities and look at the people and their influence. They're not experiencing all this. Russia's strong. Russia's strong. The Indian TV, the Indian news networks are covering it actually accurately.
Okay. Let's conclude with this.
Yeah.
Are we going to get a deal done here or not?
I don't know. We're not. I think Hem and Haw. I think the deal will be crazy. I think either Russia or Ukraine will break the deal. And I think the best thing we can do out of here is just withdraw support and leave these people. They deserve each other. Leave them alone. Let them. They deserve each other. There is no United States interest. There's no world peace interest here at all. This is just one big way to extort for the Europeans, to extort the Russians to get better deals on their natural gas.
So get the hell out.
Yep, 100%. There's no win here. There's no win. I mean, the win could have happened right when Russia invaded. Had Ukraine gone on the offensive with our support, they could have won it there. That was the time. 2022 was the time. We told Zelensky not to go on the offensive, to stay on the defensive to avoid escalation. As a result, the Russians got entrenched. They formed positions, and they've been there ever since. And with all the billions and all the training we've given them and everything we've done, Ukraine still has not had one decisive victory. The Russians are still in the Donbass. They still have the Crimea, and they're not going anywhere.
Oh, my God. It sounds all too familiar, Joe, especially for those of us who have lived through it more than once.
That's why we got to that's why Trump is right. We need a big purge in the government. We need to get rid of the think tanks. We need to get rid of all the sycophants. We need to get rid of that whole mentality, and we got to rebuild it from the ground up.
And that's the mission of our new Secretary of Defense, and I know you supported his appointment, and that's another Pete Hegseth and Secretary Hegseth.
Yes, sir.
That's another discussion. But Joe, this has been absolutely fascinating. I thank you for your time as always.
Thank you for having me.
Tremendous resource and a wonderful citizen of New Jersey. And
thank you.
Please stay involved. Please stay politically involved. Your involvement and your voice and what you bring to the table is so important.
Hey, sir, thank you. That means a lot. It means a lot. Thank you. Thank you. Likewise. Thanks for doing the show, and thanks for all you do as well.
Well, whatever. It's great, as always. Thank you, Joe. And in a few minutes, we'll hear from the president. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Have a great night, sir. Have a great night.
You too.